Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who's dialed in for Digitalization's Learning Lab webinars. Welcome you all and thank you for joining us early. We will give everyone a minute or two to dial in. So while we're waiting for that, please do enjoy the music here. Let's start the webinars and warm welcome to you all who dialed in for Digitalization Learning Lab, how to choose the right tools today. My name is Shinikit from ANDE East and Southeast Asia. I'll be your host and the MC for today. So as you see in chat, please introduce yourself, your name, organizations, and what you're looking forward for hearing from our expert and panels today. And it's glad to see all the familiar faces who dialed in and also the new faces in the room as well. So for today, we'll be spending altogether 90 minutes to hear a few things, welcome remarks, and some of you might be curious what is the Digitalization Learning Lab is all about. So we will do a little recap on that, and then we will transit to keynotes and the panels, and we'll have an plug-in open for Q&A toward the end. So throughout the webinars, please feel free to put in chat and in the Q&A box. We will be addressing all of your questions over there at that point in time. And if you are comfortable, please feel free to raise your hand. At the slot, we will be allowing you to unmute yourself and ask the panelists or the speakers then. Right, so to begin our webinars, we are honored and to have be able to. The Digitalization Learning Lab would not be possible if there is no support, a strong support with the partnership with Mastercard for Central Inclusive Growth. And we are honored to have Alisandi S. Cousins, Vice President for Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, who are champions and an advocate for the ecosystems that we are working with right now. So Alisand, if I can invite you to on camera and please kindly share the opening remarks for us. So please, Alisand.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm at a hotel, so I hope our connection stays strong. Well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Alison Eskison, and as was just mentioned, I'm the Vice President for the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. And a very warm welcome to all of you. And I'm really excited that you're all here. So let me tell you a little bit about what the Center for Inclusive Growth does and why we think the Digital Learning Lab is so incredibly important. And then maybe share with you a little bit of where we're going with this journey. So the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth is the philanthropic hub of the company. And our remit, as in the title, is around driving economic growth that is equitable and inclusive. And we do this by focusing on small businesses and working with partners to help them access to markets, access capital, grow their customer base, which oftentimes means expanding into the digital economy, particularly now with COVID, and really helping them to streamline and realize efficiencies. And so we do this by working with partners around insights, so research and evidence to help drive the design and understanding and learnings that those practitioners who are at the front lines of inclusive growth are doing. We also work with impact, so running programs where we start with a proof of concept or developing that proof of concept, but then really looking very quickly at how do we scale? Because at the end of the day, economic growth is a macro problem. And so while we might see transformative change, if we're able, we do a lot around, and why we decide to support ANDE and the Digital Learning Lab is for us, we know that we cannot do this alone, and that only when we're doing it together will we be stronger and go further. And so when we think about our motivation for why we wanted to focus on the Digital Learning Lab and support it, and to have all of you engage and learn more, is really threefold. So one, as we look to the future, we see two key pressing challenges. One is income inequality, and the other is information inequality. And we believe that the digital divide will exacerbate both of those if we are not intentional about what we do today to try to deliberately close it. And I think that that's a piece that is so important. And given that many of you are with civil society, it is important that you have the capacity to understand the digital economy, understand how it works, so that you're able to impart the best, most current knowledge available to small businesses and individuals so that they are well positioned to succeed in the digital economy. The other piece of this is really capacity around how do you run your own organizations even better? How do you strengthen the analysis that you have, the evidence base that you make decisions on, so that you can continue to adapt and pivot your programs so that you can accelerate your impact? And quite frankly, that you have the knowledge and the data to support the interventions that you're driving, and to be able to advocate with governments, with the private sector, about how your approach is making a difference. And as we look to the future, we really think that this idea of data for good becomes increasingly important. And while that's a big concept, we wanted to start with what are the digital tools that are available? How do you, as an organization, start to think about employing them internally? Also, thinking about how you start to integrate them into the types of technical assistance and capacity building that you're providing externally. Because we think that when we do this, the whole ecosystem becomes a little bit stronger. And that's really the foundation for closing the digital divide and ensuring it remains closed. And so with this, I will stop. Wish you the very best on this learning lab. And I look forward to being with you for most of it Thank you again.
Thank you, Alison, for the kind words and setting the tones for the Digitalization's Learning Lab. And it's actually sum up our efforts for the labs pretty well. So let's do a little recap of what it is. In East and Southeast Asia, as Alison mentions, this partnership with Mastercard is at the global level. And you see here in the slide is a global workshop throughout ANDE's chapters in each represent geographies. And if some of you might be familiar with the terms Learning Lab, as you work with ANDE, it is a convenience where we facilitate the peer-to-peer knowledge sharing at most of the parts. But for Digitalization Learning Lab, we add a little to be a bit more intermediate and access the need for the intermediaries or entrepreneur support organizations, that then they can help support the digitalizations and the talents that needed in the small and growing business sectors better. So the lab has been designed, and it has been a pleasure for us to work together with Accenture Government Partnership to co-create the curriculums for ANDE members to go through certain processes that develop throughout and using the Dalberg Digital Delivery Frameworks. And the purpose is as similar to others learning lab, is peer-to-peer learnings with some of the guideline of the body of knowledge from practitioners, and it would act as a guide, as a process for all the members to look into what the transformations processes. And this, at the end of the day, we are hoping to create the learning communities. And you see here's some of the convenings that has been done already as a lab progress throughout these years. And we have a privilege to have a strong cohort of 8 organizations with the support from SAP and Accenture throughout to share the example practices and how they should think about this transformation as a whole. I want to go into a little details of what are those convening that happened, just a tips of what they are and how we do it. So the Learning Lab for digitalization has been designed into three core modules, from know your user, create your offer, to define what do you need, and then the last is to create this strategy around that. And as mentioned, this is a guide to refine your positionings, to access your own capabilities, and to create certain documents where you can align with all the stakeholders to be able to deliver transformations. And we do this through the convenings, but also with the lead, with exercise, pre-work, reading, reflections, and a lot of assignment and template that we would share a little in this webinar as well. So for the first module is a very first of the edition is to take a pause a little before we going into the transformations. And as you often see in the world, there are a lot of innovations, services and products coming out, all good initiatives come out, but not often those are adopted and has been able to scale. And most of the reasons and why that happened is might not be a fit to the customer. And this represented picture is to amplify that there's a need to observe and understand the customers. And if you want to do a good transformations, then it should start evolve and revolve around the user needs. And in the first module, we anchoring what we call value proposition. So first, you start from understand your customer, from customer segmentations, profiling them, understand the needs, the pain and the gains, the jobs to be done. And then you have a hypothesis of your own product and services and how are those answer the pain and the gains and jobs to be done of the customer. And if you test that hypothesis and found the fit, then that's is a good propositions per se to then create the product and service. And this can be used for the transformations purpose as well. So the lab participants been going through the certain exercise to come up with this, and you all might be familiar with these tools, business model canvas, and the latest additions of that is value propositions design, which focus on you see these two icons, value propositions and customer segmentations. So from that, you would map and test it out, plug it in your business model and test variations of that until you find a product and services that you need. And that is often lead to the transformations of some sort as well. And after the first module, after you understand the product and service, then you're going to what does it mean for transformations. And this is definitions from Accenture, Goldman Partnership. And we set a broad terminology as activities and process that leverage the technologies to drive the impact, to accelerate the impact. And so that is a broad set of definitions. And as an organization, you would need to look at what does that mean to your own organization as well. With that, transformations mean you need to completely rewrite your business model, or that would be certain shift in how then you operate. And you see there are a couple of stages here that we define. It also depends on the needs of the organizations to transform. And there's a few reminders, as Alison mentions. The need is now very urgent to do a transformations, but as this definitions goes, is mostly evolve around humans and the stakeholders around it, the adaptability to use the technology. So please be mindful of how you engage with the stakeholders and people around that to be able to do these transformations. And in this module too, there's quite a few ways to look at the approach where you can see the transformations, but in the lab, we simplify that and see there's two broad way that you can look at this, a goal and B. And you see here goal starting from the customer needs, customer insight here, looking at what are the external facing functions that are the touch point that will you need with the customers that you are facing, the experience, marketing, the commerce. On the contrast, on the B side is most of the internal capabilities. How would you then optimize, standardize your operations and use the technology? And all these things will lead into possibly a new business model that you has been transformed. And there's a couple enablers points that you might be aware of. And in today's webinar, we'll talk mostly on the first enabler and possibly the last enabler as well. And after you look at the approach, you want to do a little assessment of your own capability against people, business, and technology. And this is an example of 3 pillars that you can look at and try to access where you're at and what are the gaps that you still see that you need as a capacity internally to be able to deliver the transformation that you set. And the last module, we look at those two combined with module 1 and module 2. You ought to be able to create the customer journey, digital journey, and from that you can take a look at all the initiatives that you need to be able to deliver the transformations. And in here you see in the picture with they post it here an example of how people list all the initiative that they need, and then you start to map that out and prioritize that against feasibilities and desirabilities. And what that meant, what are those metrics, is also depends on your organizations and how would then you prioritize those initiatives. And after you have those initiatives, you then start plotting out against the timeline, against your resources, and you'll be able to look at the phases of the implementations of transformations. And we call this a roadmap, which is at large a living document where you can use to engage with the stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, to align the efforts from time, resource, and is used to communicate throughout the organization, so each of the department can align all the initiatives all together as well. So from all these 3 modules, it can start with as a starting processes of transformation, whether you are at the beginning of the transformations or at the end of the transformation, it can be used to reflect upon the processes. And that also lead to today's conversations. We asked our lab participants and others members what are the needs, what else we should address, and that's lead to today. There's a lot of questions, the requirements from the list of the tools that are available for the ecosystem, and how then you can make that decisions on that. So today, to start with the how to choose the right tool, I want to transit us to the keynote and hear from a director from ONOW, May Thinzar Aung, the entrepreneur support organizations that help the entrepreneur do the transformations a little better. So May Thinzar, if you are ready, may I invite you on camera, and here you are, and please take it away.
Thanks, Chanaka. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on the time zone where you are now. This is Thinzar. I'm a director at ONOW Myanmar. I'm so glad to be here today to present what we have done with choosing the digital tools. And I would like to say a few things to ANDE for giving me the opportunities to present today. Next slide, please. First, I would like to introduce who ONOW is and what we do. ONOW is a social business based in Myanmar that has been providing tech-enabled integration services to migrant women since 2012. We design technology to support thousands of business owners in Myanmar. ONOW is in a unique position as we just don't provide education, but also build our own technologies to meet the needs of our operation and our target audiences. And the diversity of the organization is a lot more like our target audience. And that makes our work a lot better at supporting the business owner in Myanmar. Next slide, please. So we don't just build the technologies for our own work, but also work with other organizations to build the technologies to provide their needs. Next slide, please. When COVID-19 pandemic shuts Myanmar economy down in early 2020, we were unsure what to do because most of our design approaches were face-to-face. But we did not have much time to confuse or not to just staying doing anything. So we had to make sure our make our decisions very quickly on what we are going to do to support the businesses in Myanmar, as they were also in the same situation like us. So we wanted to have so many, as many businesses as possible survive the COVID-19 economic crisis. So as our approach was, offline and face-to-face before 2020, we were able to support a very limited amount of businesses, supporting as many businesses as we can as our dream. And we were able to implement our dream by the decision we made in early 2020 by using the digital systems. Even we have to switch our activities to automation platforms, we kept our high-touch approaches at, with businesses, business owners by supporting phone-based coaching. So the approach is not just the automation, but also stay in the high touch is important for us, to stay in the touch with the businesses and business owners to support really well. Next slide, please. We have launched our digital tools in June 2020 to support micro and small businesses. It was quick decision and also implemented very quickly in a few months to respond rapidly. The graph on the left is the number of business owners who came into our digital coaching platform in 2020. In the graph on the right is the number of the coaching calls our coaches made in 2020. Because of the decision we made to change the approaches, we were able to have thousands of businesses. Next slide, please. Before we made the decision to choose the digital tools, we thought two key areas. The first one was our clients, the client's technology skills and the platform they are familiar with. And the second was our internet operation. If the tool will be easy to use for our coaches, as they are the key people who will be supporting the businesses by using the digital system we will be creating. And the tool has to be flexible and adaptable based on the problems our coaches may face. So we had to build our own system. Next slide, please. Most of our target audience are not so good at digital, especially in Myanmar. Most people are only familiar with social media apps like Facebook, Messenger, and Viber. They don't know, how to search on Google or, using any internet browser. And they don't typically download the app except for the young people, who are good at digital skills. And the people necessarily don't want to keep the app if they are not using it often because of their phone spaces. So when we thought, about choosing the tool, that needed to be the tool which the business owner can come right away and able to use it right away. So we choose Facebook Messenger, but the Facebook has been blocked in Myanmar, since February 2021 due to the political situation in Myanmar. So we went further by building our education content and Viber, web-based net, and we are, even working on the WhatsApp at the moment. We choose those platforms based on our, customer and always the customer centralized approaches. Next slide, please. Kenny was a grocery store owner who found our coaching tool through Facebook. So she said that she didn't get opportunities to study business, which is true for most micro and small business owners in Myanmar. So our coaches call her once a month, as she has registered for the monthly coaching service, through our digital tool. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, our coaching service was face-to-face design until early 2020. As the number was very small, we used Google Sheet to track the data, and our coaches did not have major problem using the Google Sheet at that time. But after switching to the digital coaching system, so many people came into the platform at the same time, in just in a few days. And the coaches can't use the Google Sheet live, so they have to move the data to another Google Sheet. Since the coaches were using the same sheet at the same time, it took time to load the data. And I often made mistake by typing by shaking a lot of data in the one row and one column, and of course when serving to the client and undermine the coach's ability. So we had to make the decision to choose to use the tool which is easy to use for our staff, the coaches, to serve the clients better. So it wasn't easy for us to make that decision, as the tool we choose was quite expensive for us, for an organization like us. But now we realize that that was a good decision we have made. Next slide, please. See the Google Sheet here with a lot of data, in the same sheet. So we track the data of every action our user take in the, our coaching, digital coaching tools, as we needed them for our coaches to look them over before they make the calls with the business owners. So if someone types something in the wrong cell, it can mess up everything for that, that specific clients that we are serving, and also for, the other clients as well. So in the result, it can cause both our staff and clients, problems. Next slide, please. So we decided to use Facebook platform. The screen that you are seeing as a profile of the business owner. So our coaches can see the business owner case by case, like new user just came, sign up for our coaching service, or the user who already received the, first coaching call, etc. So I can filter according to what, what our coaches want to see. And we have, assigned coaches for each business owner. And I mean, like the business owner will receive the coaching call monthly from the same coach. The coach can see all the details of their business before they make their first call, as the business owner self-assess, their business in our digital coaching platform. And the great thing is that our coaches can propose to technology team if they want to update the design of the tool or anything, they want to update to make the process more efficient. Next slide, please. So our coaches were quite happy with the tool that they are using for coaching. So one of our senior coaches, Markaaz, said that they can deliver efficient service without wasting time on unnecessary tests, like looking at the data here and there, and then copying the data to another place, etc. And the great thing about the tool is that our staff can propose a technology team for any system design update, as they know better design for for them to do the better work. Next slide, please. So I would like to suggest you to take three key things here regarding choosing the right tool for your organization. First, if you have clients that will be using your technology, please consider their level of digital scale and what they are familiar with and which technology or platform is good for them. Second, your internet operation is really important. This means your staff who will be using the tool should be comfortable with the tool and easy to access to do the good work. The third, the cost is definitely a thing that we all have to consider before we buy or create a new technology. But the long-term scalability or the digital approach is also very, very important. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. So if you have any question, please type in the chat. And if you have any questions later, you can reach out to me, thinzar@onow.org. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you, Thinzar. It's actually quite a tie to our learning lab before as well. You start your journey, the transformations looking at, so this is the problem that you have, and this is how the clients or your own customers need to be adapted to, and what would be the experience throughout. And then start from there, the initiative and the tools that you choose is prioritize against the desirability and feasibility, right? In your own terms, how that is easy for your coaches and as well as your clients to use. And then you choose the decision to build, and we will talk about that a little more in the panels on why you choose to build that. But it's glad to hear your journey. So now let's move on to the second keynote that you'll be hearing for today's webinar is from Fabi Hubschmid. She's a Chief Operating Officers and co-founders of Markaaz, which is a small business platform that connects each other and support them. It is unfortunate that she would not be able to join us live here today with us, but we are fortunate to have a recordings of her keynote. So please welcome Fabi for this. Apologize if you can't hear the sounds. Let me replay videos.
My name is Fabi Hubschmid. I'm co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of Markaaz. Now, I'm here today in a video message. I'm not able to participate in person, but I still want to share, I'm very honored to do so, a couple of points with you about today's topic of today's session. Now, before we do that, quickly about Markaaz. Markaaz is the world's first global pre-verified platform for businesses, both small and big. And you're able to find different partner suppliers in there and do three very specific actions: find, verify, and monitor. Now, when we're talking about tools, points that I wanted to bring into today's discussion, and I really hope that my other panelists are building on these topics, are three. I'd like you all to think about interoperability of tools. That's the first point. I'd like you all to think about the provider of these tools and the security that they're applying to their tools. And first and foremost, also the reliability of their tools. So these 3 points. Let me back up for a moment. So why are these points important? Now, Markaaz is built on years and years of research, right? So we have studied small business and startup behavior in Southeast Asia, in the United States, in Europe, etc. And one of the things that we have realized is that more and more small businesses are overwhelmed with the plethora of point-to-point solutions out there, right? So if I would be able to share my screen with you all tonight, you would see that I have a ton of tabs pinned on my browser, right? So on average, small businesses use about 20 to 25 different point-to-point solutions. They don't usually speak with one another. They don't interoperate with one another. And most of the times, a small business is actually not even using them to the full capacity, even though they make up about 15% of their expense base, right? So we are here not only to build a single source of truth, which Markaaz over time will evolve into, but we're also here to help make sure that the small businesses that we have in our network, be it our existing customers or new customers, that we can help them make the right choices with their digital tools, right? So remember, the first point was the interoperability. It's really important that you don't have different tools that do not speak to one another. You do want to make sure that you know, your CRM speaks to your other systems. You want to make sure that whenever you load up a certain amount of data, that you're able to retrieve them yet again, not just when you do one action, but when you do couple of different actions. You want to make sure you're not interrupting the processes that you have in your business. That is very important, and build that from the get-go. Do make sure that that's there from the very, very beginning. And then second point that we already talked about quickly before is actually who is your provider, right? So before you decide to invest in a new digital tool, make sure that you verify and vet, spend some time vetting who this provider is, right? So is it a real business? You know, have they been still in business, or has their business operation been interrupted with the global pandemic? Do they have certain protocols in place about safety and security, right? One of the topics that with the global pandemic became more and more to the forefront of all businesses, small and big, is actually cybersecurity, right? And you want to make sure that it's not only your own house that is protected, right, on all fronts. You also want to make sure that you do not leave a door open through one of your providers. It is actually that in the recent cases that made the global headlines, there were quite a few cases where businesses were being a victim of cyber attacks that actually not their own system were being attacked, but the cyber attackers went in through a third party. So it's really important that you make sure and you hold the providers that you're working with to the same standard that you are applying in your own business, right? And then the third point that we already said, reliability. It is important. You want to make sure as your business grows, it's your livelihood, or the businesses that you all have in your cohorts or hubs. You want to make sure that you have somebody on the journey with you that can grow over time with you, right? Make sure the business is reliable. Make sure the provider has a pathway towards the future, so you all can be on that journey together, right? When you do make that decision to invest in a tool, you want to be using it over some time. Now, this is it from me. I hope these insights have been valuable. If anybody has any questions, I am very happy to address them over email. My email is fabi@markaaz.com. Please reach out, and it's been my absolute pleasure to address you all tonight. And I thank ANDE Southeast Asia for having me, and Gina Kid and the team for organizing. Thank you very much. You all have a great day. Bye-bye.
Right. Now we hear from both May Thinzar and Fabi on the points and perhaps insights on how then you make a decisions to the tools. So we are moving now to the panels, and this is where we'll be spend the most of the times in our webinars discussing and hearings from experienced leaders as well as practitioners here. So if I may both to invite Matthew Wallace and Stuart Clarks on camera and join with me on the stage would be helpful. Right, so Matthew Wallace is Managing Director and Co-founder at ONOW, the organization you just briefly heard from May Thinzar on what they do. And Stuart Clark is Principal Consultant SAP, Business Transformation Service, and have a pack of experiencing the transformations of the development world, social enterprise, and different type of business. And both of them will be addressing the key points on then how would you make a right decisions. Maybe we can start with the round of introductions, and perhaps you both can start to address the very first questions that we all hear from our members on then how would you determine whether you want to buy that tools or to build that tools. Maybe we can start with Stuart. If you don't mind, please also, introduce yourself a little and also address that question. Stuart, please take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Andy for having me on this panel. It really is a privilege to be on this panel and to be speaking to you, and also to be alongside Matt, who I respect tremendously, understanding his background now. So good to be with you, Matt. Folks, how do you choose the tool? Well, in all the experience that I've had through transformations and through running my own business, there's one question that when failing comes up, and there's one question when succeeding sort of diminishes. But at the end of the day, the most important question to ask when choosing a tool is why. And following your why will be your what and your how, which will result in the plan that you're going to use to deploy the tool that you're acquiring. But when it comes down to the why, it's really important that you understand why are you in business, or why are you creating this non-government organization or non-for-profit organization or charitable organization, and why do you really need this tool? Now, I work in, as you can see, in a very large software organization that has salespeople across the globe, and I've worked in other organizations with salespeople. They will sell you the tool as quickly as what they can. But most importantly, you need to understand the why you want the tool and why do you need the tool. Once you've answered those questions, then we can talk about a few other things. Thank you, and I'll hand over to Matt.
Hey, thanks so much, Stu. It's great to be here on this call with you. Thanks a lot to Andy for hosting this webinar, for having this conversation. So my name is Matt. I'm the Managing Director of ONOW Myanmar. I've been working with SME development since about 2009 in Myanmar on the ground. I'm a SME expert first. I'm a technical expert first with SMEs. I'm not a technologist first. And I think that has been a key, probably a key differentiator in our work at ONOW, that we were into incubation and acceleration before we ever got into technology. And so anytime we come to a decision about technology, it's from that background that is more interested in what the business that we're supporting might see and might need. So when we made our own decisions as an incubator to go into technology, and when we decided if between the question of are we going to build it ourselves, or are we going to buy it from someone else, our first question was, did anyone else understand our target user, our target customer, the way that we did? And if so, were they able to design and build a solution that could solve the problem for our target user? For us, we found that nobody else was doing that back when we started on that journey back in 2016. And so we felt like we had to build the capacity for ourselves inside our own house. Now things have changed a lot in the 5 years since then, and there are some really great providers now in the market. And so it feels to me like that's a harder decision that a lot of organizations have to face at this point. So I still think, though, it goes back to the question of, if you understand your target user really well, if you understand your target customer really well, the business owner and the needs that they have and the capacities they have, that should guide your decision making on what tools you choose. We'll get deeper into that question over the next few minutes, but that's my perspective on it. Thanks, Chinnikit.
Thanks, Matt. Actually, I want to dig a little deeper on making decisions between buy and build. I know that the landscape had changed a little, but if you were to advise the ESO or anyone in these rooms on how then they should look at, what are the key criteria to look at between building our own capabilities for technologies and to go out and find tons of tools in the market, what would be a strategic perspective that you need to be aware of? Matt, you can kick this off, and Stuart, please add after.
Yeah, sure. So I think a really important kind of perspective on this is to decide what you're trying to achieve with this tool. And I think probably check your own motives a little bit. A lot of times we, as business support organizations, enterprise support organizations, we think technology is important, so we should have it. And so we'll oftentimes disregard what we're actually trying to achieve with that technology. And so like when a technology company approaches us with a technology pitch, we know that there's donor money out there to pay for that technology, so we should get that technology. And oftentimes we'll disregard some of the important questions about things like pedagogy, and is technology really the best way to deliver this good or service that we need to provide to the business that we're supporting? Pedagogy in the sense of, is it really just about content transfer, or is there a higher level that we're trying to achieve of interactivity with our customer? So I think before you even decide to buy or build, you need to kind of check what are your actual motives in choosing to go the technology route. So before you even get to buy or build, is it really the right solution? Is technology really the answer for you? Even if there are donor dollars for it, is it really right for you? I keep delaying the comment, Chinnikit.
No worries. Stuart, any comments on that?
No, well, there are comments, and my apologies. I should have introduced myself in the beginning. My work within a very large software organization really sits at the point of when technology inflects with the human being, and that's the part that really fascinates me. But coming back to Matt's comments, absolutely spot on. And all that I would add to that is be very careful about the technical or technology debt you create for yourself. It's very easy to get caught up in the romance of technology, and before you know it, you're paying a maintenance fee and a subscription fee that you can't afford, or that you could rather invest in something that's more suitable to what you're wanting to achieve. And we have seen over the years the transition or transformation of technology from being on premise, in other words, on site physically, to in the cloud. And the benefit that sometimes that brings is that you can pay for a subscription and turn it off whenever you don't need it, with some legal commercial constraints within that. The downside of that is by going that route, you have to conform or adopt what they give you. You can't design it for your own suitability. So finding that balance between build your own versus procure your own matters spot on. But all I would add then is be careful of the technical debt, or where you put in your investors' money or the donors' money into your organization, because you don't want it locked up that in technology that later becomes a weight to bear for your organization.
Thank you, Stuart. Actually, that's the questions that we will also address a little down the road. But let's assume here, we make a decisions. We already see this technology is the solutions or the way to go. How would then, as an organization, go and look about it? I mean, there's tons of tools nowadays, either free, either some premiums, or a customized one to you. How would then you go about and looking and scout for what available and what is actually fit for you? I think this is a lengthy process, and not sure, is there any best practice that you can share, as you can see? Stuart, can I start with you?
Yeah, by all means. Very often the conversation starts with technology, and it should never start there. It should start with, what's the business need that I'm trying to address? What's the business process that I want to enable through technology? If you get that right, then yes, you're going to start looking at and trying to evaluate the technology. Now, what I've seen over time and what works really well for our customers, and you please just accept our customers are large organizations, they're not necessarily SMEs, and I'll leave Matt to talk to the context of SMEs, but I think the same rules would apply, but just in a different context. We look at it through two lenses. Can we do it? So if we're sitting with a customer, helping them decide the most suitable technology for the business challenge that they face, is can they do it? And that consists of two things. Is it feasible? In other words, can it scale? Can it integrate? Is it secure for them? That's the hands of the customer, or the hands of your team. The second part of can we do it is around scalability. And that's the feet of the customer. Does it have the legs to go the distance with your business or with your customer's business? Can it be rolled out to the rest of the business ecosystem? And then the other side of that is, should we do it? That's the heart of the customer. Is it really desirable? Is this the sort of thing that will delight our customers or our stakeholders or our user? And then finally, the part of should we do it is around viability. And that's the head of the customer. Does it make business sense, and does it make financial sense? And then will it drive business value? You don't want to be buying a technology that just sort of limits costs. You want to have a technology that's going to drive and continue to drive business value. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I think something that Stuart is hitting at is that you can't just have one capacity within your organization. There are a lot of turnkey technology solutions that do one or two things really well. But when you start talking about building a system with workflows that are meant to operationalize your whole effort, your whole business effort, you start to need a lot of interactions between different types of technology. So that means you probably would, if you decided to build it yourself, you're going to need more than just the coder, and you're going to need more than just the person who thinks technology is useful. You need someone in the middle who understands how the human interacts with that technology. And you need people who understand the back end and how all the data flows. You need people who understand the user experience and the user interface. It's not a small thing to choose your own and deploy your own. It's a very large effort that requires a significant amount of expertise in all of the areas. So there's a really interesting tension that happens in the design world that talks about iterative design. It talks about starting small and getting a lot of testing and getting a lot of real-time response to the iteration that you build. But the other side of that tension is that there are technology stacks, okay? And there's technology built on top of technology built on top of technology. And every time you add another layer of technology to achieve some kind of scale, some kind of effort, you add a lot of complexity that requires you to have a lot of expertise in-house. I mean, for us, that's the reason we went from being primarily a coach and training organization to more than half of our company is now oriented around the technology. If you're not prepared for it, that can get out of hand in a way that you aren't expecting, and it can undermine your entire business model. And it can undermine your entire approach to supporting businesses. So I just think there's an important tension to recognize with the idea of iterative development, which is a good idea, and you should have iterative development, but there is a cost growing over time if you choose to build it yourself. And so you should be prepared to understand the impacts on your business model if that's the direction you go.
Thank you, Matt. And I think we talk about scalability quite a bit now, and comparing to the approach you're taking. So, as a leader of organizations, and for Stuart, as someone who advised the leaders of organizations, how would you then ensure the scalabilities of your solutions? Well, even you buy or you build, I think that's the same consideration. So because you build a tool for now, but 5 years down the road, you don't know. So how as a leader perspective, how would you look at this particular problems here? Matt, can you start? Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Stuart. You already started. Please.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Matt, I like your iterative approach, because that's what we subscribe to as well. Even being a large organizations, when it comes down to sitting with our customers and looking at building out a solution, iterative is the way to go. Whether you call it iterative or sprint or fail fast and fail quickly, it's awesome the same. And so we have an explore, discover, design before we build and before we then run and scale. But all through that process, we take those 4 elements that I spoke about, feasibility, scalability, desirability, and viability, and we run an assessment for each of those 4 things continuously through those phases that I've just mentioned. And we do those assessments not based on our own thinking, because our unconscious bias will drive it in the wrong direction, but doing those surveys with our stakeholders, with our customers, with our staff, to make sure that continually, before we get to actually building and then running and scaling, we're meeting the criteria for all 4 of those all the time. Now, once you've got the system up and running, that's just the beginning. You constantly have to go back and reevaluate, for example, in your point, the scalability of your system, and start addressing, we all do strategic planning for businesses. Well, hand in hand with that goes the ability of your systems. And Matt was talking about layers upon layers and upon layers. It goes hand in hand with understanding that your IT stack can sustain your strategic plan into the future, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years into the future. And what changes do you need to make as part of that roadmap to ensure that you can sustain it?
Yeah, I think those are important points from Stuart, because just from our own experience of getting into building our own technology, we were definitely caught off guard by the load necessary to constantly monitor those aspects of what we were doing. And I was pleased that we had a long runway to figure it out, but I think most companies don't have that. Most companies don't have 2 or 3 or 4 years of runway to decide if their technology solution can be impactful. So it's important to keep those indicators right in front of you, and to have strong metrics, strong dashboards, people constantly monitoring both the effectiveness and also the feasibility of what you're building. Thanks for that, Stu.
Yeah, Matt, but what if we don't have the capacities or we don't have the resources? What should we do as an organization? At the large organization, I assume you have IT architect, you will have a data guy looking at how things would flow. But if we are ESO, donor implemented programs, how should we look at this? Even we can buy the tools, not even sure how we as an ESO would start to go about that. Can you shed some light? And Stuart, please comment after.
Yeah, so having some basic level understanding of data, data securities, data privacy, data warehousing, having some basic level of that before you ever get started is a must-have. But that's true for any industry, any leadership of any role. And so if you can leverage that into having a very strong bent toward understanding what's happening in response to what you do, then you're then you're likely to head towards some level of success. It may be a small scale deployment, but it can be useful. And this gets into the data question and a little bit away from the way you deploy technology. But if you don't have a mindset that wants to see the data that you're producing and explore it and understand it, then you're starting a little bit behind the game, and you're maybe heading down a road that you shouldn't go down. So I think number one, as a leader, you need to have a hunger to understand the data that you already have. Because even if you don't have a large technology deployment, your business is producing data of some kind. And so I think if you find that you don't have a hunger to understand what's in the data, you need to kind of ask, is this the right direction for you to go? But I can tell you from our own experience, we started with Google Sheets. Google Sheets are secure. That's a place that we kept small amounts of data that resulted from a lot of the surveying that we did. And you can start as easy as using open development kits, things like Kobo Collect. That is absolutely a kind of form that you can deploy, a technology you can deploy to interact with your business owners that you're supporting. And it takes a little bit of technical capacity, but it doesn't take a ton. It's designed specifically for people serving in low digital literacy contexts. So I would recommend you start somewhere like that to gather some data from ESOs, from your enterprises that you're supporting, and get hungry about the data that you're discovering and what's there. So you don't have to start at the top. You don't have to. Iterative is a good approach. If you do it quickly, fail fast, Stuart said, absolutely. Quickly to understand if it's the direction you want to go, and that starts to help you understand, should I invest more? And should I begin to bring in some experts who can actually give me some strong guidance about what to do when I'm maybe getting in over my head? Once you get past Kobo Collect, once you get past the open development kit tools, you need some expertise, and you should start talking to some other organizations who can provide it to you.
Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I remember one of the first businesses I ran. We ran it on a thing called Lotus 123. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it came on a floppy disk. Matt, do you know what a floppy disk was?
Yeah.
I think that was hilarious, but really what we were doing is we were collecting data or punching in data so we could measure the performance of our business. Roll forwards from then till now, along a lot of years, when I sit with customers, the conversation is around data. Doesn't matter how big or small you are, data is key to business today. It gives you a track record of how you're performing, but used properly, like Matt was saying, looking at your data, it can start giving you predictive analytics of what your future is going to look like and where you need to change what your future is going to look like. So the world has been driven by data at the moment. People get upset when data gets leaked, and yes, understanding data privacy and the privacy of individuals is really important. But coming back to data, first and foremost, you need to decide what are the measurements of your business that's going to show its success. Then you need to find the data that you're going to use or collect to measure that. And so understanding that data from the bottom up, but also understanding how you're going to use that data, because you could end up collecting a whole bucket load of data, terabytes and terabytes of data that you have no use for, that costs you scarce resources because you have to keep on growing the memory size of your systems for all that data that you're collecting. So be very careful that, when you collect data, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons to measure the key performance indicators of your business.
I think those are really important points, and I would tell you, if you don't realize the capacity of the tools you're using, it will surprise you very quickly that you will hit up. Google Sheets has limits. There are cell limits in Google Sheets, and if you aren't aware of those and how much data your processes can produce, you will hit those limits soon, and you will lose data that you didn't even know you lost. You will hit API limits, you'll hit API call limits and lose data you didn't even know you lost. And suddenly your whole system will groan under the weight of the data that it's producing and may even collapse. At the very least, it will stop at the least opportune times. So I think Stuart's making a really important point here, that our systems have to be built for scale, and we need to realize earlier in the process when they are not built for scale. It's fine to start iteratively and test out, but you need an eye towards scale from the beginning, because you'll hit those limits before you even saw them coming. And there's oftentimes there are warnings that you're hitting limits, but they're hidden down deep in message forums, and they're hidden down deep in the back end of platforms, and you don't even know that they're there until you discover weeks later that you've been bumping up against API call limits and data storage limits. They don't tell you about this in many cases, and if you don't know where to look because you don't have the expertise, you may be surprised that you're not delivering anything like what you thought you were delivering. And by the way, I'm speaking from experience here. We've been there, we've done that. It comes up on you really quickly. It's not years down the road, it's weeks and months down the road. So have an eye towards scalability immediately. You're testing an idea informally, that's great. But if you see upside to it, if you see a benefit to it, if you see that it's actually working, start to turn your attention to talking to experts about it earlier rather than later.
It sounds like an expensive problem that you have, Matt. I think to
it can be. It can be.
Let's talk about data a little. We heard very often big data, small data, how to all that stuff, and we are now know that data is gold as we operate in the technology world, but often we don't know what we collect most of the time, and we use fractions of that data that we collect to interact with the consumers or even internally. How do we ensure that the collective knowledge of the tools, the data, the insight that has been generated and collected is shared among the company and is utilized properly? You see it in the gold mine, but you're not mining it. I think that's one of the analogies, and how as an organization in non-profit, looking at that gold mine and start digging it out. Matt, Stuart, please feel free to jump.
So I'm going to run first, okay? Because we're in the midst of building our data team. We've been building our data team for years, though. You never really reach the end of building your capacity to analyze and deploy the insights from your data. So I would say it's useful for every organization to invest in this capacity now, even if you don't have what you would consider a technology platform. Find people who can at least run pivot tables on a spreadsheet. Find people who can at least work with the data in a spreadsheet in front of them, and then start to build out some people who have a higher level of capacity. Skills like being able to code and analyze using R and Python are invaluable to a company. And in many ways, you as a leader of a company may not grasp the benefit to those kinds of skills until you trust some other people have told you it's useful, and you start to see the benefit of it that comes from the person you've hired. So it requires kind of a step out in faith a little bit sometimes in hiring a person who understands the benefit to the data that you have. Not the last thing, but the next thing I would say on this is you have an ethical responsibility if you're collecting data to understand it. You have some ethical requirement that if you're gathering data, especially from underserved populations, you have a responsibility to understand what it says and allow it to guide you. And this means a lot of times there's a little bit of a higher burden on those of us in the social space. A lot of times, most regular companies that are not thinking about social, they will deploy technology that is completely useful in developed contexts, where everyone is tech literate, where everyone is using systems that are quite easy and gather a ton of data very easily. But the requirement on us in the social space is that we actually develop tech solutions that can be used by people who don't have as much access to great technology, who don't have as much, who are using phones that in many cases can't even run an app that you have designed that's top notch and amazing. So the standard on us is a little bit higher to develop for phones that have less capacity. And if we do that, it will unlock data that most others cannot access and can't leverage to serve clients that are at those less served levels of the market. So I could get on a soapbox about this, but you're right, Chinnikit. We don't know the data we have until we start sifting into it. And that means trusting some people who know how to do that.
You know, yeah. Absolutely like the points Matt's making. Now, I a long time ago ran my own business. I started my own business, and my wife and my two daughters have also started and ran their own businesses, more successful than me, I might say. But nevertheless, one of the things we've all realized is that as a small business owner, you get to the point where there's tension between growing the business and administering the business.
Oh, yeah.
And what Matt is saying here, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, really in today's world, the other tension is managing the data, collecting and managing the data of a business. And rather invest early in that, in both the technology and the individual expertise to manage the data rather than later. Don't sit with the tension, because you will be losing opportunities hand over fist over time because you're not aware of the data that's there, or as Matt was talking about APIs, the constraints that you're facing with the data that you're collecting.
Yeah.
Great. I want to come back to the tools a little bit. I think we talk about the downstream side of the users of the tools, but let's come back on. Let's say we already choose the tools against desirability, feasibility, your capacity. You look at scalabilities already, but oftentimes you have the tools, but no one actually use it, right? Even in your own teams or customer facing, then what would be a tips or strategy then to have the adoptions of the tools that you would be using from both internal perspective and also as a customer acquisitions perspective?
That is a really good question, and we could most probably spend hours talking on it.
Right, I think we have like a minute or two for each of you before we going into a Q&A. So maybe a bit brief.
So very briefly, I worked in the role that I'm in now before mobile and even .com had come onto the world, and so the change management of people with new systems coming in was managing a lot of fear that people had about how it would change their jobs or whether they would lose their jobs or those sort of things. In today's world, to get people to buy into an app that's going to be on their phone is very easy because people are using apps all the time. So it's changed completely, but it doesn't take away from, and I want to go back to Matt's point about in his environment, there's people using phones in environments that maybe don't even have a signal for most of the day, or don't have the memory to take the app. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I think I've always found it useful to take a sales perspective on this. In sales, you want to reduce as much friction as possible. You want to make the next move as frictionless as you can. And sometimes we expect that you can, with the populations we work with, we expect that you can develop an entire line of technology in a row and they will just fly through it. But I think it's really important to understand for your target customer that at some point they may need to actually talk to a real person. They may need to actually interact with a real person. And it's about understanding where in the line of your technology that you really need to be handing them off to a real person. It may be a real person to nudge them down the road through more technology interactions, but at some point it probably requires a real person on a phone or in person with them, guiding them to take the next step. And I think that's just essential for you to understand from the perspective of your target user, the business that you're working with. For us, technology is not the whole solution. We would much rather have deep one-on-one interactions with our businesses. And so for us, technology was never meant to be the only thing. It was meant to make our touch very smart. It was meant to make our touch better and more scalable than it would be without the technology. So that meant building a full stack complicated system that gathers a bunch of data and analyzes it and puts it in the hands of a coach at the right time when they're actually interacting with a business owner. That's not an easy thing to do. It takes a long time to get there. but it was very iterative for us. But the point was always to make our coaches smarter, because the real gains to supporting business owners who have infinitely complex, individualized, granular experiences, that requires a real person in many cases having a conversation with a business owner. So conversion has to be about getting them to that place where a real coach talks with them about their business. That's for ONOW. It's not necessarily true for all of them, but understanding where a person needs to interact with a real person, I think, is really important in that conversion channel, that conversion funnel.
Yeah. Actually, this is a great transit to the digital divide as well. I think one of the infamous problems or challenge that we have in the development world is the digital divide, and not many people have access to device. And I think, Matt, your example is one way to approach digital divide to unprivileged groups, the new segmentation bottom-up pyramids, where you develop the systems across already set infrastructures, or whether that through mobile phone or different devices, and you build your solutions not necessarily from the technology point of view. Technology is a tools to deliver the whole process. I think that's already the digital divide. Just one last questions before we going into Q&A. Sorry, I know that we already a bit of time, but I want you, both of you, to comment on a cybersecurity side of things a little bit. Fabi has mentioned that on her keynote, and I think as more and more data being collected, and we talk about data as a goal, and there's a caretaker mode of that, which is the security side. And as a development world, social pressure is on us to mentor that, to have a standards on that. But as a small organization, how we can approach that, and what should we look at? Stuart, can I start with you?
I'll leave Matt to talk about small organizations, but from our point of view, so within our organization, which is about 100,000 employees, every employee every quarter has to do a learning and write a test on data security, as well as the different elements of cyber and physical security. Because most data breaches or cyber breaches are to get at data within your organization. It's the most traded commodity on the black market at the moment. Maybe the worst is human trafficking, but data is most probably the most traded commodity. So cybersecurity really, apart from organizations with key infrastructure and critical systems, cybersecurity really is about protecting the data and the access to that data.
Yeah, I think we have this idea that this is a spectrum, and that security is the spectrum, and that I want to become more secure. I want to improve my processes to get more secure. But I think in today's world, you need to think of it more binarily. The fact is you're either secure or you're not secure. And I am definitely not a data security expert, though I do have one on my team that I trust completely. But a lot of times what we found is where there are security issues are really in operationalizing the data, and people having access to data within our team who shouldn't have access to data. So there are absolutely technical approaches to hacking into organizations and taking data. There are also less technical approaches where data is easily lost or spread around or held by people who shouldn't have access to it. So a lot of times I'll leave the security conversation to experts like Stu, and I would rather encourage you to think about who has access within your own company to the data that you have, and ensure that you have some data controls so that people really only see what they need to see to work for you, and not just have access to everything. That leaves a lot of opening and holes to less technical approaches to getting the information that you have if you don't have some strong privacy controls even within your organization.
Thank you, Matt and Stuart. I think we should have to move to Q&A now, but I think our next webinar will be on utilizing data, and you guys should come back for that discussions, and we will need to reserve an hour for that. Right. I will start with the questions in the Q&A, and if anyone who in this webinar is comfortable, please raise your hand. I will start with these questions for the time being. So this is from Hans, asking both Stuart and Matt on your opinions to build your own tools with no-code or low-code tools that could help reducing or keeping the cost down and also speed up the process, right? Scalability would be an issue that mentions often with no code. So how many users are you thinking about when you talk about scale? That's a good question on scalabilities. Stuart, you want to start that?
I'm not a coder, and like Matt, I must probably come from a business background and a sort of human sciences background. Sure, it's a tough question, but I would always go back to the question you need to ask yourself is why. Why do you need a low-code tool, or why do you need a high-code tool? And as Matt was saying earlier about iterative building and design and building, you can quickly find out why you do or why you should or shouldn't have the choice that you've made. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I absolutely. I agree with Stuart's comments. I think the importance of the usefulness of tools, low code and no code tools, is it helps you understand your use case and if it's actually impactful or actually useful to your company. And then if it is, many times that's when you need to turn your attention to how to build for scale. So scale varies. Part of the question was, I think, about what we mean when we mean scale, and that absolutely depends on your situation. For us in ONOW, scale looked like going from serving 300 businesses with a platform that we ran to serving 16,000 businesses with a platform that we run. What we had built for 350 was never, with low code to no code tools, was never going to be able to handle the crush of 16,000 businesses. And so when we saw what we were doing was useful and workable and was achieving the impact that we wanted to achieve, that's when we turned our attention to investing a lot more to develop a much more scalable and feasible platform that didn't undermine our business model. So it really, to me, no code and low code tools are about kind of like a minimum viable product approach, that early iterative stage that helps you understand, is this useful to us as a company? And does it make sense to invest in it at a larger scale? So you might think of it as piloting, or you may think of it as an MVP. But keep in mind, always, you need metrics to determine if it was impactful and was useful, and monitor those metrics so you know if you need to invest in something a little bit larger. So in that way, you can get something live, you can get something out there. It does speed up the iterative process, and it does keep costs down, more so than immediately hiring something that's a full design solution. But don't stay there if scale is what you're looking for, and define scale ahead of time. Okay, I think it's important to define scale early. What does scale look like? Decide that before, and you kind of have your eye on the goal when you get started.
Yeah, actually, just to add on comments on this and add on to your point, Matt, I think the technology scalabilities, when you are piloting, I don't think that is an issue to scale in terms of the numbers of users, but most often what you find that you are hit on the wall of business process. You just can't have the capabilities to answer whatever comes from the tools. And then that's when you know that you need the next step level of the tools that help the internal operation as well. And that's where the scalabilities or scale discussion will kick in, and you would go in to talk to donors or investors that, hey, now you need either more people or better technologies to make people who are operating smarter.
Yeah, I mean, on that, Chinakit, I'm not a coder myself, but I and another colleague, we're the ones that built our first chatbot technology. And it helped us see the benefit of it, and it helped us be able to tell that story so that we could find the investment and the funding we needed to make something much larger and more scalable. So absolutely, that's true. That's correct. Stu, I think you cut you off.
No, you didn't. I wanted to add something. In all the years that I've been working in and around technology, which is most probably 22 or 23 years now, the one enduring test that has always helped businesses is stress and volume testing. When you build a tool, the importance of stress and volume testing cannot be overestimated. Now, nowadays, there's a lot of enterprises that sell you tools for stress and volume testing. Because at the end of the day, particularly as a small business that you're growing, you don't want to become a victim of your own success, that you get to the point where you've developed a technology that can no longer cope with the volume of business that you're having to deal with.
Yeah, I think growing the business is such a tension, right? It's about responding to demand, but also building your capacity as that demand is rising. In a lot of cases, you're creating that demand. And so it's a stop and go and progressive process to build capacity with delivering what you need to respond to demand. You can mess it up and miss your opportunity, or you can mess it up and burn your money and miss your opportunity. So it's full of pitfalls. It's I think that's the funnest part about running a business. But
that's on you, Matt. Right, I think come to the last comments here in the chat from Joseph. I think Thinzar has addressed certain, but it would be great to hear both of the comments. Technology utilized must be mobile phone friendly, as 3G, 4G, 5G smartphone or 2G to access to the technology. It's important to understand that technology sometimes need to hand off to in-person contact. This is also your point, Matt, to optimize serve the needs of the end user. Welcome the speaker's feedback on this. Right, any further comments on this statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world's mobile first now. It absolutely is. So you may be designing for computer use within your operation, but your end user is on mobile. So you need to make sure those things come together.
Yeah, I fully agree, Matt. If I just look at what's in front of me, I've got two monitors, a laptop, a mobile phone, and an iPad. All of them have apps and run anywhere until I move into the bushland of Australia and can no longer have a connection. And our company worked with farmers to help them. The selling price that they were selling to the intermediary traders was very low, but the price of that same product of a lower quality, once it had gone through all the intermediaries getting to the marketplace, was much higher. And so we developed an app for them on their phones to be able to track all of that, until we discovered that 80% of their time was spent outside of the network. So by the time they got to a network and realized what was going on, it was too late. And so we had to develop technologies to preserve digital certificates on their phones so that when they came into a network, they could use that. And so, we work in a world of large enterprises. I think 77% of the world's GDP goes through our customers' systems. And we often lose sight of that man or woman with a 2G phone or an old, let me say it, Nokia phone, that just enables them to send text messages and call their family when they're back in an environment of a network. And so when you are developing tools for those sort of environments, be sure to understand your customers' the day in the life of your customer, or develop your customer's journey map, so you can really understand where is your tool or technology going to fail in their day at a critical moment where they really need it.
Right.
Great. That's a great comment. I think time flies. We are a minute left on this. I think we should come back and have this discussion some other time as well. And until Meta World, VR, AR has been popularized in the world, I think we stick with the mobile first. Right, so this is coming to an end of our webinars. There's upcoming event, and please stay connected with us. Follow along with the tools discussion today. There are Matchmaking Expo, bringing all these vendors that we just briefly described to you, and there's special offers for everyone to join this Matchmaking Expo as well. And please stay connected with us. throughout. And there's a feedback forms for you to give us a little thoughts on how we do today. You like or don't like the webinars, what we can do better. So there's in chat, please just take a minute to fill in that form. And with that, I would thank you for everyone who joined the webinars today. It has been absolutely a pleasure to have these discussions with Stuart, Matt, May Thinzar, and Fabi as well. So for today, thank you all very much for joining us. Until next time, thank you and have a great day.